Hey guys, welcome back to Movie Thoughts with me, Connor. If you like what you see here, click that subscribe button down there or follow me right here at averagemovie_thoughts on Instagram. Alright, so today I got a twofer for you. And thank God it's not going to be like I did a couple weeks ago with Broken Hearts and David Copperfield. Yes, David Copperfield. 2020 screwed me over. Right, it's going to be the same franchise this time. So let me just go ahead and pop these up right about here. That's right, it's time to talk about the It Duology. Let's get started. It is a 2017 film directed by Andy Muschietti and stars Jaden Lieberher, I hope I pronounced that right, Bill Skarsgård, Sophia Lillis, Jack Dylan Grazer, and Finn Wolfhard, and follows a group of 7 kids who dub themselves the Losers Club, who are constantly attacked by It, an ancient evil who feeds off fears. And in addition to having to defeat It, they also must confront their own demons at home. Alright, so fun fact about this movie. This was the technical first horror film that I ever watched. Before about the age of 15, I mostly avoided horror. I never really watched a bunch of horror movies. My parents aren't big fans of them, so they were never really around in my house. But thanks to hanging out with friends who like horror and getting more involved, I finally watched my first technical horror film, It. And this is honestly one of the best introductions I could have gotten for horror. I understand there are a ton of classics out there, but for a guy like me who's never really seen a horror film, at least until I was 15, this was a pretty great introduction. Because it's not super terrifying. It's creepy as crap, but it's not super terrifying. But nevertheless, it's still a really well-made horror film. The cast they picked here is really solid. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise is amazing. I love his performance here. I don't want to compare it to the 90s miniseries, even though, like the 90s miniseries, it does have a solid kid cast and a solid premise for that. Because in the 90s miniseries, the kid part was pretty good. This is a lot better than that, but the kid part was pretty good at the miniseries. And Tim Curry himself as Pennywise in that miniseries, you know, this old thing.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
Yeah, isn't that great? He was amazing. He was amazing. So Bill Skarsgård had a lot to live up to, and yeah, he was great. He really was. The rest of the key cast is great. I loved their performances. This movie is really funny. Really funny. It honestly shocked me how funny this movie was. I laughed at so many jokes in this film, and quite honestly, that's more what I credit this movie for. It's more funny than it is scary. This movie's creepy as crap, yes. But there were a lot more funny moments that I was laughing at, more than I was like, whoa, okay, this is a little unnerving. And honestly, that's okay, because this is more of a character study than a tried and true horror film. It's more about these 7 kids and their lives and what they have to go through day by day, because this isn't just about some kids who are going after this ancient evil monster that turns into a clown and a leper and a face from a painting who likes to eat kids. No, it's about these 7 kids who have to deal with their own problems at home. Bill, played by Jaden Lieberher, has to deal with the fact that his parents are neglecting him after the death of his brother by It. Right? Beverly has to deal with the abuse from her father. Right? All these kids are going through something. Right? And that's what makes this film really shine, is the fact that these kids sell this movie. If it wasn't for them, this movie would not work. Oh, and Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise, but that's besides the point. If it wasn't for them, this movie would not have worked well, because these kids have to pull off a lot here, right? And they develop a great connection with the audience, especially me. I really like the connection here between these characters, right? I feel for them, I understand them, and it's really, really good camaraderie between these 7 kids. However, where this film runs into problems is that, honestly, there's just not enough time here. Right, with the It book, it's thick. It's like Bible-sized. It's a big book. Right, and it leaves time to credit all of the losers. You don't really get that much time here. Don't get me wrong, you get moments where you can see each kid, but the problem is that it just doesn't leave enough time for some of the other characters. Like Stanley, he doesn't get a whole lot. There is some here, right? But compared to like Bill or Beverly, there's just not a whole lot. Richie, even, like, his life at home just isn't really given much development. He's just kind of the everyday funny man trash mouth, and it's great, but still, there's just some development here that's better than others, and it just doesn't mix to the best of the ability, but given the fact that this is a 2 hour and 15-minute film with the cast of characters like this, it works. It works well enough, and there's really not that big of a slight against it, but there's also moments in this film that just, like I said, this isn't a scary film. It's very creepy. It's just not scary. And that isn't a big slight, but when you have a film like this with a very creepy clown and a bunch of weird imagery, a bunch of stuff that really gets to you, there's just not a lot here that I'm like, well, this isn't going to make me sleep at night. At least not easily. So, yeah. But nevertheless, this is a good horror film. It kind of reminds me of, obviously, a lot of like the 80s reboots like Stranger Things and films like E.T. and Goonies, with the way the kids work together against this common enemy. Kind of like how they went against the government in Stranger Things or E.T. It just feels kind of like one of those, which also isn't a big slight, because a lot of films do that. A lot of films are derivative of others, and there are still some classics that are derivative of other films. But nevertheless, this is still a really good horror film. And I'm really glad this was my first real introduction, because honestly, this will be a favorite of mine for a while. It is my favorite horror film of 2017. It's a really, really good film that I do recommend if you have not seen it. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It Chapter 2 was the 2019 sequel to 2017's It, once again directed by Andy Muschietti, and this time stars James McAvoy, Jessica Chastain, Bill Hader, James Ransone, Jay Ryan, Isaiah Mustafa, and Bill Skarsgård once again as Pennywise, and follows a losers club 27 years later as they come back to Derry to face it once more. So, talking about the 1990 miniseries for a second. The kid part is good. It's pretty good. The adult part is lacking majorly. And yeah, that's kind of how this is. Except not as bad of a scale as the miniseries did it. This is worse than the 2017 film. It is. From what I've heard for the book, because I have not read the book, the adult half is usually the weaker half of the It novel. And that is definitely the case here. It's the weaker of the two films. Is it still good? Yes. I greatly enjoyed this film still. It's entertaining still. It's still creepy. It's just less. This film is basically the first film, but just less. In scares, in humor, somewhat. There's still really good funny moments in here, but it just feels like a lesser copy. And it's so long. It's so long. The pacing here is just it's honestly numbing at certain points. I can pinpoint certain things in this film that I'm like, yeah, you could have pulled this, you could have pulled this, you could have pulled this, and you could have made this shorter. But I get some parts where you do need to add certain things in. There are a bunch of flashback scenes in here that, yeah, kind of drag a little bit. And just give certain commentary that it's just like, well, why wasn't this in the first film? Like, there's a scene in the clubhouse in this film. Yeah, I'm going to talk some minor spoilers here. Sorry. There's a scene in the clubhouse in this film that just didn't appear in the first film. It's just like, oh, so this is new stuff, but you just didn't put it in the first film. So it's like brand new context. So, great. Good to know. Anyways, there's a bunch of scenes like that in here that just feel like some of this, while, yeah, it probably could have been new stuff, it does feel like a bunch of scenes that should have been shot for the original one that just didn't make the cut, and they just shoved them in here. And I heard that this film originally was like 4 hours long. Yeah, you feel that. There's a bunch of things here that I honestly was like, well, you could have put this in and put this in, and, well, yeah, you know people will probably sit through this. I mean, the first film was a great success, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The cast here is amazing. Once again, they really did perfect casting here. I really believed that James Ransone and Jack Dylan Grazer honestly could have been related with how accurately they looked. Bill Hader here is the standout. His performance here is absolutely amazing. if there is honestly one horror film this year that I could have been like, yeah, no, this person deserves an Oscar nom. Aside from Lupita Nyong'o and Us, aside from her and Us, Bill Hader as Richie Tozier. He deserved a nomination if they'd even considered him, because he was amazing in this film. He's also still really funny. Bill Skarsgård, once again, is amazing as Pennywise. He's still creepy as crap. But this film also is noticeably darker in tone. Like, you get out of the kid stuff and you hit the adult stuff, and it just immediately feels darker, more gritty, more realistic. And honestly, that was a big plus for me in this film. You don't want to feel the same vibe that you felt in the first film with a bunch of kids. They're adults now. They're facing real world problems. You're not going to feel the same stuff that you felt in the original film. And with that, it plays well enough because each one is still going through their own personal struggle here. And honestly, this feels bigger on scale than the first one. It feels bigger. How do I put it? So, okay, I already said minor spoilers, and this is a big one. So, the climax of the film, Pennywise Spider. The original novel is just a giant spider. 1990 miniseries. I don't know what that was, but it definitely did not look like a big spider. It just looked like some weird two-eyed, eight-leg thing. But no, the spider here makes this second film feel bigger in scale, at least for the climax. The rest of the film, yes, feels bigger in scale compared to the first film. But with the final fight of this film, again, between the losers and Pennywise, it feels a lot bigger in scale. And honestly, you don't see many big-scale fights like that in horror films. And it's really, really good here. Some of the CGI is interesting. Some's great, some's not. They used a little bit of de-aging for some of the kid actors because, well, let me put it in this example. Finn Wolfhard does not look like he did 2 years ago. He doesn't. He looks a lot different. Not a lot, but not enough to where it's like, oh yeah, he looks older. And it's noticeable. Not terrible, but noticeable. And that's the same way with a bunch of monsters in this film too. The scares here, like I said, feel weaker than the first one. There's still a bunch of moments where I was like, okay, that's good. But there's still enough here to where I do find enjoyment in this film. This is another character study like the first film. The plot here is pretty standard. It's not a lot going on. But it's because of these characters that makes the movie go forward and honestly doesn't really get me bored. I know I commented on the pacing and the runtime, and yes, you do feel it. You feel it for about hour and a half in. You check your watch, you're like, oh my god, we have another hour of this movie. Yeah, that was me the first time I watched this. I still enjoyed it, but yeah, that was me the first time I watched this. I hadn't seen this in a year. I recently watched it for this. And yeah, I think I enjoyed it a little more than the first time, but maybe it's also because watching it on small screen, I noticed a few more things that I couldn't have noticed in the first film when it was basically right in my face, sitting in the front row, just being like, oh joy. But nevertheless, this is a good horror film. It's not as good as the first It, but it's not enough to where I can sit here and say, yeah, this could have been better. And honestly, it could have. There was enough here that I'm like, well, yeah, you probably could have pulled out a little more, threw some of this in, but that's just me trying to be nitpicky at this point. I've heard that Andy Muschietti, because I watched an interview with him on Sci-Fi Wire, he said that he wants to do a 5-hour-long supercut of this film with a bunch of deleted scenes and a bunch of new stuff he wants to film. That was a year ago, so if that's actually happening, I am all for it, because between this, a 2017 film, yeah, I'm all for that, because I would love to see an It Supercut directed by him. He did an amazing job with this film, and the last film. His vision here for these films was amazing, and I really loved the camera work he did. It's a little grainier in this one, but that's just, I feel like also part of the fact that it's just darker in tone than the first film. And yeah, I know I'm talking about the first one still a lot more, but this is still a decent horror film that if you like the first one, I think you would enjoy the second one. You might not as much, but you might still enjoy the second one. I'm going to give It Chapter 2 a 7 out of 10. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Look forward to more Halloween reviews very soon. If you like this, stick around because I got a bunch more coming at you.